Nissan as a brand has always been one for consumers. They put the price point for their cars low while the horsepower remains high. So for one of their flagship sports cars being able to cause a man to sell his manhood, two things had to happen. That car had to be really great, and that man had to be really desperate. We'll say hello to Mark Parisi, the man with one testicle and one Nissan 370Z. Mark Parisi, like many others, really liked the Nissan Z platform, and in 2013 he really wanted one, but didn't quite have the funds to afford one. So instead of saving his money and waiting a couple of months like a normal human, he decided to do some weight reduction to his own body, and in return got one of the world's most loved sports cars. But as we all know, the 370Z is not the first Z car of all time, and it really isn't that expensive either. So what caused Mark Parisi to take away 50% of the reason he's a man? Well, it all started in 1959 when a company called Datsun, which by the way is now Nissan, decided they wanted to bring a sports car to the world and introduced us to the Datsun Fairlady. This little car, even though it is very adorable, was not loved by really anybody. It was slow, it didn't look great, it was too small, and the sales numbers were lower than KD in Call of Duty.
Oh, I'm flat.
So Datsun luckily didn't give up on the idea though. They knew that the world needed something from Japan that was affordable and quick, and a man by the name of Yutaka Kariyama kept on pushing, and luckily he did it.
The 240Z, a new kind of economy car from Datsun.
In 1969, Datsun would reveal the first generation of the Nissan Z car, the Datsun Fairlady Z S30, known in America as the Datsun 240Z, and it was great. It was a two-seater, low-slung, futuristic, rear-wheel drive, pretty powerful sports car that they built to compete with the Toyota 2000 GT. With a combo like that, it makes sense that it did so well. It did so well, in fact, that the car sold over 150,000 models in the United States of America within the first 3 years, buddy. Americans were loving this taste of Japan so much, and that's probably due to the 2.4 liter inline six called the L24 that managed to make a pretty impressive for its time 151 horsepower. It was also very light compared to the American muscle cars of the time while remaining rear-wheel drive, so fun could still be had. It was just a perfect recipe for success. So Datsun knew they had a gem here. They had just bet $1,000 on black and won it, so like any other gambler, they did it again. In 1974, they gave us the wonderful Datsun 260Z, which yes, still went by Fairlady Z in Japan, and it did go by the same chassis code as well. This one though looked almost exactly the same as the 240Z, but the big differences were the motor and body style. They bumped the displacement up to a 2.6 liter inline six, which obviously increased the horsepower, right? Wrong, buddy. Thanks to America's wonderful emissions standards, it actually lowered the horsepower by 12, bringing it down to 139 horsepower. However, the rest of the world got the car without the silly emissions standards on it, so they ended up getting 154 horsepower. Thanks a lot, United States government. They also made this one as a 2+2 model, which looks kind of weird and I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest, but that didn't last long at all. Obviously, not many people are going to want to go with a car that decreased in horsepower, but now has a higher number in the name. So the very next year in 1975, they introduced the Datsun 280Z. This is still technically the same generation of Fairlady Z, by the way. They never changed around the chassis codes until the 280ZX, which, yes, is a different generation. I know it's confusing, but all they did was just keep increasing the engine size of the original 240Z, and the 280Z was no different. It came with a 2.8 liter inline six now, and they got the whole emissions thing figured out, so this one made 170 freaking horsepower, man. That's a pretty large jump from 139 in one single year, but Datsun knew it was time. The world wanted to see an improvement. They wanted Datsun to wow them once again, but when the 280ZX came out in 1978, the world didn't know what to think. It was completely different from the last generation, but the parts that truly mattered weren't different. They kept the same 2.8 liter inline six from the 280Z and the same gearbox while changing everything else. And some of those changes the public didn't seem to really like all that much anyways. It was much more modern for sure, but the looks were a bit too sharp and not rounded off enough, especially when you base your whole sports car as a quote-unquote curved design. The car was meant to be a complete change, and one of the biggest changes that it went through was the fact that it was now more comfortable than the last generation. generation. They made the car have a longer wheelbase, it had much more modern and comfortable interior, and a better radio, and in my opinion, they just made it more ugly. And the people and critics alike did not like this car, especially since the price doubled from the last generation due to all of these high-tech new features on it. After all, this is a sports car. What made the 240, the 260, and the 280Z so popular is that it was quick, nimble, and good looking. The buyers did not care about comfort, they wanted speed, and since this generation was a whole 3 seconds slower in 0 to 60 times from the last gen, it did not sell well at all. So in a desperate attempt to reclaim their crown, Datsun slapped a turbocharger on it, increasing the horsepower to 180 and finally making people happy again. And with a clean slate, they worked on the next generation, and in just 2 short years, in 1983, the Nissan 300ZX Z31 was born and actually did pretty well. What they did was kept the comfort and feel of the 280ZX, but brought the speed and handling of the 240Z for a very nice combination. And for the boxy looks, I know it isn't the best looking design out there, but cut them some slack. It's the freaking 80s, okay? Everything was meant to be boxy so that they had somewhere to do all their coke. But the motor was a massive increase as well. For the first time, they used a V6 engine in a Z car instead of the inline 6 engine, while also bumping the displacement to 3 liters. On top of that, they gave it a turbo as well, because they were not going to have people call their flagship sports car slow again. No siree, Bob. Which, by the way, managed to make a nice 200 horsepower exactly. Pretty good, Nissan. But then the 90s happened and people were over the boxy look of the Z31, so they introduced Nissan's most advanced Z car up until this point, the Z32. The Nissan 300ZX Z32 was a complete redesign of the Z31 and people absolutely loved it. It was the most beautiful Z car yet, and they used the same engine from the Z31, which, keep in mind, was actually a pretty decent increase, and made even more power with it. That's right, buddy old pal, the Z32 doesn't just look better than the Z31, it's also significantly faster. It makes 222 horsepower on the base 3-liter V6 and a whole 300 crab walking powers on the twin turbocharged model. Yes, that's right, this one had not 1 but 2 turbos on it, pal, with an absolutely beautiful design that even the purists can enjoy, an incredibly powerful new motor, and a pretty strong past. It's no wonder the Nissan 300ZX Z32 was named one of the best cars in the world by magazines worldwide year after year. Bit of a fun fact for you here, a bit off topic, but I just had to say it. The design was so good that Lamborghini used the same headlight design on their freaking Diablo. That is a supercar, using a Nissan's design. So the 300ZX was an absolute success. The twin turbo model was being compared against the Dodge Viper and Chevy Corvette of the time, but then something horrible happened. Just like right now in 2022, people got boring and didn't want to buy a sports car anymore, especially not with how the economy was going. And with a price tag of close to $100,000 in today's money, people stopped buying the Nissan 300ZX, making Nissan pull the plug on the sports car in 1996, which for the only time in history meant there was going to be no new Zs for years to come. It wouldn't be until 2003 when Nissan finally decided the market was ready for their sports cars again and introduced the incredibly influential 350Z Z33. Before you ask, no, we will not talk about the horrible concept car. That thing shows up in my freaking nightmares. But when the 350Z debuted, people loved it again. They took away the X in the name as well, meaning they were building a full-on sports car now without caring so much about being as comfortable as possible, which people actually loved. And it worked in both of our favors because now, since they don't have to worry about spending so much on luxury, the car costed less than half the total cost of the previous generation, coming in at only $26,000 for the base model. And paired with the incredibly good looks and the new 3.5-liter V6 that made 287 horsepower at launch, up to 306 horsepower at the end of its runtime in 2008, it was a huge success again. And even today, 20 years after launch, the car still serves a purpose as one of the best first sports cars for anybody to get into. I mean, I'm probably the smartest man alive right after Guy Fieri, and I bought one, so you know it's good. But even though I thought the car was absolutely perfect, Nissan was like, what does Mark know? We can do better than that. And so in 2009, they did. They gave us the Nissan 370Z C34. This car was completely different from the 350Z in many ways. The engine was now 0.2 liters larger at a 3.7 liter V6, and that managed to make a nice 330 horsepower at launch and all the way up to 350 horsepower by the time it was done. It was such a large jump, in fact, that this is the generation that my man Mark that we talked about in the beginning of this video video, sold his testicle for, which honestly makes no sense because this car stayed true to Nissan's word, being very affordable. And due to it being so affordable, so powerful, and just an all-around great sports car, people bought them even when the car was way too outdated. But now that brings us to today, September of 2022, and the new Z car is still very fresh on the market. So fresh, in fact, that they're still being called the 2023 Nissan Z RZ34. This new Z car is another massive improvement, but with an actually smaller engine size from the previous generation. It is now a 3-liter V6, but thanks to something called 2 mother trucking turbos, it makes a very nice 400 horsepower in a 6-speed manual going to the rear wheels. It's very hard to tell what the new Z car will do in the market today and the impact that it's going to have at this time, but it's looking very good so far. So, just a short 54 years ago, Datsun started something that to this day is commonly regarded as one of the world's most popular sports cars. And even though it did go through many ups and downs, there's no denying the impact it has had on us for years now. I have very high hopes for the new Z car, and Nissan, if you're watching this, thanks for making something worth selling your testy over. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of today's deep dive video on the Nissan Z cars. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a top 10 budget cars, and then we're going to do another like celebrity cars, but we're going to be doing another deep dive video at the end of this week, probably on the Chevy El Camino. I hope you guys are loving this series. You guys seem to be loving it, so that's good. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Das Vidania. Have a nice night.